A wildlife biologist was staring at an X-ray image on a screen inside Zoo Miami's animal hospital when he realized the tracking transmitter he'd surgically implanted into a juvenile Burmese python was broadcasting from inside the stomach of something else entirely. Not a larger python, not an alligator, not any animal on the list of suspects the research team had been working through for months. The signal was coming from inside a native Florida cottonmouth, a venomous pit viper that most researchers had walked past 1,000 times without giving it a second thought. The python it had swallowed was gone. Not dead, not partially consumed, not scattered across a trail in recognizable pieces. Gone. Swallowed whole, transmitter and all, by a snake that the scientific community had never seriously considered capable of hunting one of the most dangerous invasive predators on the American continent. When the researchers pulled the X-ray image up on screen, they could see it clearly. The python's spine, perfectly intact, curled inside the cottonmouth's stomach cavity. The surgical transmitter still pulsing, still broadcasting. The data was not corrupted. The equipment was not malfunctioning. A native Florida snake, measuring less than 4 feet in length, had identified a juvenile Burmese python as prey, positioned itself in perfect ambush, struck with surgical accuracy, and then spent over an hour methodically unhinging its jaw and walking a constrictor nearly as long as itself down its own throat. And nobody on the research team had seen it happen. Nobody had predicted it. Nobody had designed a study to look for it. The cottonmouth had been doing this work quietly, invisibly, in the same black water where researchers had been chasing signals for years, and the only reason they found out was because the transmitter kept beeping from inside a predator that wasn't supposed to be there. That discovery cracked something open in the scientific understanding of what is actually happening in the Florida Everglades right now, because for the past 4 decades, the story of Burmese pythons in Florida has been told almost entirely as a story of unstoppable destruction. Researchers moved through those flooded wetlands cataloging losses. Mammal populations collapsing, bird species disappearing from digestive systems pulled out of captured snakes, entire sections of the Everglades falling ecologically silent. The data was devastating and it pointed in one direction. The pythons were winning and nothing in the American ecosystem had the tools to stop them. Then the transmitters started going dark and the cameras started recording things nobody expected and the story began to change. Not completely. Not fast enough to declare victory, but enough to fundamentally rewrite what scientists thought they knew about this invasion, and about the native predators nobody had been watching. To understand why the cottonmouth discovery hit the research community so hard, you have to understand exactly how thoroughly the Burmese python broke the Everglades. These animals are not from here. They evolved in the tropical forests and wetlands of Southeast Asia, in places like Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia, inside ecosystems that spent millions of years building the checks and balances necessary to keep a massive constrictor from eating everything within reach. King cobras hunted them. Monitor lizards raided their nests. Parasites and disease pressures thinned their numbers through generations. The food web that surrounded them had refined itself across geological time, specifically around the task of keeping Burmese python populations from growing unchecked. None of that came with them to Florida. The exotic pet trade of the 1980s brought thousands of Burmese pythons into American homes. People purchased them as juveniles, manageable at 12 to 18 inches, visually striking, unusual. Then those animals grew. Owners who had never fully processed what it would mean to share a living space with an 18-foot, 200-pound constrictor made decisions that set the ecological catastrophe in motion. They drove to canals, to nature preserves, to the edge of the Everglades, and released their pets. Living weapons deposited into a landscape that had zero evolutionary memory of what a Burmese python was. No native predator had been trained through generations of experience to hunt them. No prey animal had developed instincts for recognizing or escaping them. The Everglades simply did not know what had arrived. Then Hurricane Andrew made it worse. On August 24th, 1992, a Category 5 storm with sustained winds exceeding 165 miles per hour tore through South Florida, flattening entire neighborhoods and ripping apart commercial structures across Homestead and Florida City. Among the facilities destroyed were multiple commercial reptile breeding operations that had been running in the area. The storm's destruction put hundreds of breeding-age Burmese pythons directly into the wild in a single night. What had been a slow, scattered leak of individual pet releases became a sudden flood of animals entering prime habitat simultaneously. The Everglades absorbed them all. The prey animals of those wetlands, raccoons, rabbits, opossums, marsh birds, white-tailed deer, had built their survival strategies across thousands of years in response to alligators, Florida panthers, bobcats, and birds of prey. They had no response at all to a 20-foot ambush predator that hunted in silence, moved through water without creating a ripple, and killed by wrapping its entire body around a target and squeezing until the heart stopped. The numbers that emerged from research stations over the following years read like an extinction event compressed into a single generation. Raccoon populations across surveyed areas of the Everglades crashed by 99.3%. Not a gradual decline, a near total collapse. Opossum populations fell by 98.9%. Bobcat populations dropped by 87.5%. Marsh rabbits, muskrats, and cottontail rabbits were functionally eliminated from territories they had occupied for thousands of years. White-tailed deer were found whole inside python digestive tracts. American alligators, animals that survived the mass extinction that killed the dinosaurs, were consumed in single meals by large enough pythons. Researchers, pulling necropsy samples from captured snakes, documented the remains of 58 different bird species inside python stomachs, including migratory birds that had flown from Canada specifically to winter in the warmth of South Florida, gone on their first encounter with a predator that had never been part of their world. The response from government agencies was massive and sustained. Burmese pythons were classified as injurious wildlife under the Lacey Act, banning their importation. Florida launched bounty programs. Detection dogs were trained to locate pythons by scent, tracking chemical traces of shed skin and waste products through miles of dense swamp vegetation. Thermal drones scanned the Everglades with infrared cameras, looking for the heat signatures of basking animals. Environmental DNA teams tested water samples for traces of python genetic material. The Florida Python Challenge, an annual competitive removal event, has grown in scale every year. In 2025, the competition drew 934 participants from 30 states and Canada who collectively removed 294 pythons across 10 days, a record at the time. In 2026, just weeks ago in July, 907 participants removed 280 pythons, with one hunter named Tom Rahill alone capturing 96 animals in 10 days, nearly double the previous year's winning total. Since the year 2000, more than 23,000 wild Burmese pythons have been removed from Florida through all combined programs. The FWC's Python Action Team has reached record removal numbers. The investment of resources, coordination, and human effort has been extraordinary. And the python population, estimated today at somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 animals spread across the subtropical wetlands of South Florida, has barely registered the pressure. Every serious researcher who has spent significant time studying this problem has arrived at the same conclusion. The pythons are established. They are reproducing. They are essentially impossible to eradicate now that they have reached this scale. A single female Burmese python can lay between 12 and 100 eggs in a single clutch. She wraps her body around the nest for the entire 60 to 70-day incubation period, generating metabolic warmth through rhythmic muscular contractions, a cold-blooded animal's version of brooding, defending the clutch without eating, without leaving, with the full force of a constrictor that can exceed 200 pounds. The juveniles that hatch reach breeding size within 3 to 4 years. They can live for 2 decades. The reproductive math of this animal was designed by millions of years of evolution for a world where natural predators were constantly working against it. In Florida, where nothing predated them for decades, that reproductive machinery ran completely unopposed. This is the context in which the cottonmouth discovery landed. This is why when Ian Bartoshek and his team at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida tracked a radio signal to an adult cottonmouth in Big Cypress National Preserve and confirmed through X-ray imaging at Zoo Miami that the snake inside it was the juvenile python they had been monitoring, the room went quiet. Not just because a cottonmouth had eaten a python, because it meant the native ecosystem had been fighting back in ways nobody was systematically looking for. The Florida cottonmouth, Echistrodon piscivorus cananti, is among the most underestimated predators in North America. Adults typically measure between 30 and 48 inches. Exceptional individuals push past 6 feet. They are thickly built, heavily muscled, far denser in body mass than their length might suggest. They live in precisely the semi-aquatic environments that Burmese pythons colonized when they expanded through South Florida. Flooded cypress swamps, blackwater root tangles, drowned grass prairies, coastal marshes. This is cottonmouth territory. These wetlands are not new habitat that these snakes moved into after the python invasion. This is where cottonmouths have lived for thousands of years. The pythons moved into their ecosystem, not the other way around. The defense posture that gives cottonmouths their common name, coiling into a tight position and opening the mouth wide to display the stark white interior, is the warning display, the theatrical performance. The real weapon operates on a completely different level, and it is what makes cottonmouths so extraordinarily effective against prey that might otherwise overpower them physically. They are pit vipers. Between the eyes and nostrils on each side of the head sit heat-sensing pit organs capable of detecting infrared radiation with extraordinary precision. These organs register temperature differences as small as a fraction of a single degree. They do not rely on sight. They do not rely on smell alone. They hunt in thermal signatures. In total darkness, in murky underwater conditions, buried under layers of decomposing leaf litter, a cottonmouth knows exactly where warm-bodied prey is located. A juvenile python that has been basking or has recently digested a meal produces measurable thermal contrast against the surrounding water temperature. There is no hiding from a cottonmouth in its own territory if you generate heat. The darkness of the Everglades at night is not darkness for these animals. It is a hunting environment they are perfectly designed for. The venom refines that advantage into something almost surgical. Hemotoxic, refined across millions of years of evolutionary pressure to destroy tissue and blood cells from the point of injection outward. The chemical cocktail contains metalloproteinases and phospholipases that break down cell membranes, disrupt blood clotting, and initiate systemic tissue breakdown. For smaller prey, envenomation is typically fatal within minutes. But what makes the cottonmouth's strategy against large or potentially dangerous prey particularly effective is the strike and release technique. The snake does not grapple. It does not attempt to constrict. It does not engage in any prolonged physical confrontation that would give a larger animal the opportunity to fight back. One fast, precise strike to a vulnerable location. Instant withdrawal to a safe distance. Then waiting. The venom works. The prey weakens. The prey dies. The cottonmouth approaches when the outcome is no longer in question, begins the long, methodical process of swallowing. By the time the jaw starts unhinging around the prey's body, the venom has already begun dissolving tissue internally. The cottonmouth does not need to be physically stronger than what it hunts. It needs to be faster for approximately 1 second. Researchers confirm that cottonmouths are documented predators of at least 27 different snake species as a normal part of their diet, including other cottonmouths. They are ophagous, snake-eating, by evolutionary design, by millions of years of hardwired predatory instinct. When Burmese pythons established themselves in cottonmouth wetlands, they weren't entering a habitat without snake killers. They were entering a habitat full of them. The cottonmouths didn't learn a new behavior. They applied an existing one to a new species on the menu. USGS researchers confirmed multiple cases of cottonmouths found with juvenile Burmese pythons in their stomachs. Zoo Miami's X-ray images made the confirmation visually undeniable. The first confirmed case involved a cottonmouth measuring 63 centimeters snout to vent, a relatively modest-sized animal that had consumed a juvenile python. The second confirmed case involved a larger individual, around 87 centimeters, that had swallowed the python tail first, walking the entire body down its throat over the course of more than an hour. That detail matters. Tail first. The same end a constrictor would use to begin wrapping. The cottonmouth had struck at the most mechanically effective point of entry and worked from there. This was not a random opportunistic encounter. This was an ambush predator applying learned or instinctive strategy to a specific prey type. And the timing of the kills aligned with the vulnerability window of juvenile pythons. Young pythons, under 18 inches, have not yet built the dense body mass and crushing muscular force that make adult Burmese pythons essentially invulnerable to anything short of the largest alligators. At the juvenile stage, they are just another snake moving through the water, and cottonmouths eat snakes. But the cottonmouth was not the only native predator the cameras and transmitters were documenting. The same research effort that captured the cottonmouth kills was recording something broader. An informal coalition of native Everglades animals that had, apparently without any coordination whatsoever, begun targeting Burmese pythons at multiple points in the snake's life cycle. American alligators had been taking pythons all along, but the transmitter data revealed that smaller gators, animals in the 9-foot range previously assumed to be too small for serious confrontation with large constrictors, were making kills with notable regularity. Ambush from underwater, explosive lunge, the ancient death roll that alligators have been executing unchanged since before the dinosaurs disappeared. Done. These animals had not retreated from the python invasion. They had been fighting it continuously, in complete silence, without any of it appearing in the scientific record until electronic tracking made the kills visible. The bobcat documentation produced perhaps the most stunning footage of all. In December 2022, researchers tracking a male scout python named Loki through the breeding season found his decapitated remains near Naples. A 25-pound bobcat had killed and cached a 52-pound, 13-foot Burmese python. No bobcat ancestor had ever encountered a Burmese python before this invasion. There was no genetic memory of how to handle one, no instinctive behavioral template inherited from generations of experience with this specific prey. The bobcat assessed the situation, identified an opportunity created by cold weather that had left the cold-blooded Loki sluggish and exposed, attacked at the head, where a constrictor is most vulnerable, and killed an animal twice its weight. Ian Bartoszek called it a win for the home team. It was also something more than that. It was evidence of behavioral flexibility operating faster than anyone expected. Earlier in June 2021, wildlife cameras funded by the USGS had captured a documented first in the entire scientific literature of this invasion. A bobcat raided a Burmese python nest, This was not scavenging on abandoned eggs. It was a direct confrontation. The camera sequence, documented in a peer-reviewed paper published in Ecology and Evolution, showed the bobcat discovering an unguarded nest, depredating it over several days, and then returning after the nesting female had come back, engaging her with front paw strikes, driving her backward through aggression, and continuing to take eggs while actively managing the threat posed by a much larger snake. The first photographic evidence in history of any native Florida mammal raiding a Burmese python nest. The behavior was not instinctive. No template existed for it. The bobcat had developed an entirely new predatory strategy within its own lifetime in direct response to a threat that hadn't existed in the Everglades 30 years before its birth. The coalition extended further still. University of Florida, researchers documented vultures feeding on python eggs at a monitored nest, the first recorded case of any bird preying on a Burmese python nest in Florida. Raptors were being documented taking juvenile pythons from exposed positions during early morning hours, removing animals before they could grow into the 18-foot predators that swallow white-tailed deer whole. A 2024 study by researchers at the University of Cincinnati and the Conservancy of Southwest Florida confirmed that the largest Burmese pythons in Florida can now open their jaws to a maximum gape of 26 centimeters, wider than previously documented, which means a 120-pound deer is now within their feeding range. Understanding what these snakes can consume keeps expanding, which makes the native predators targeting them at the juvenile stage all the more strategically significant. An informal new estimate circulating among researchers suggests the combined pressure from cottonmouths, alligators, bobcats, raptors, bears, and panthers has pushed the survival rate of young pythons down to around 15% and falling. This is the part of the story where the data starts to feel like something other than pure catastrophe. Not because the invasion is over, not because the native ecosystem has recovered. The mammal populations that collapsed are not back. The bird species pulled from python stomachs are not restored. The reproductive math of an animal that lays up to 100 eggs per clutch and reaches breeding age within 4 years still does not favor the defenders in any straightforward calculation. Between November 2025 and April 2026, the Conservancy of Southwest Florida's research team removed 177 pythons from a 200 square mile area inside Collier County, animals weighing a combined total of over 8,000 pounds. Around 1 in 4 of the female pythons captured contained the remains of white-tailed deer. The scale of the predation these animals are still conducting on native wildlife is not diminished by the discovery that cottonmouths are hunting juveniles. But the nature of the story has shifted. What the transmitter data and the camera footage established is that the Everglades did not simply accept this invasion. The native ecosystem began responding in ways that weren't visible until researchers started instrumenting the snakes themselves and following the signals wherever they led. The cottonmouth was there the whole time, hunting the invader in the dark, operating in thermal signatures in water that a human research team couldn't see through, applying millions of years of snake-killing experience to a species that arrived from the other side of the world. The bobcat was there, developing entirely new tactical behaviors within a single lifetime, learning to raid nests, to drive nesting females backward through aggression, to cache kills twice its own weight. The alligator never stopped being an alligator. Ancient, armored, waiting in the same water it has occupied for longer than modern humans have existed as a species. None of them waited for authorization. None of them consulted a recovery plan or applied for a grant or coordinated with another agency. The native predators of the Everglades simply did what predators do when a competitor enters their territory. They adapted, they fought, they started hunting. The cameras recorded what the transmitters found, and what the footage shows is not a defeated ecosystem lying passively under an invader's weight. It is an ecosystem that has been fighting back in silence for years, using every biological tool available to it, building pressure on the invader at the most vulnerable point in its life cycle. What cannot be answered yet, and what keeps the researchers returning to the water every morning, is whether it is happening fast enough. Whether the cottonmouth hunting juvenile pythons today builds a behavioral advantage that propagates through generations. And whether the bobcat that learned to raid a nest teaches something through observation that shifts the dynamic across the next decade. Whether the sum total of all of it, the vipers in the leaf litter, the raptors in the canopy, the gators in the shallows, the bobcats at the nests, combined with the 23,000 pythons removed by human hunters since the year 2000, and the record removal seasons of 2025 and 2026, adds up to a force the reproductive biology of a Burmese python cannot absorb and overcome. That is the only question that matters now. And the answer is still forming, pixel by pixel, one recovered transmitter at a time. Somewhere in the Everglades tonight, in the black water of Big Cypress, between the cypress knees and the floating mats of vegetation, a cottonmouth is lying completely still in the leaf litter at the water's edge. Its pit organs are reading the thermal landscape. A juvenile python is moving along the shoreline 18 inches away. And it has no idea. The Everglades is still fighting. The question is whether it has enough time.